Good day everyone, I am Adibo Ali Daniel. I want to welcome you guys to eTUTOR YouTube channel. And for today's class, we are going to be treating government and also be diving into the topic titled Military Rule in Nigeria. So once again, welcome. Thank you. So like I said earlier, for today's class, we are going to be treating military rule in Nigeria, or we can also call it military intervention. Now, after the election that took place in 1964, in 1964, Nigeria had our first federal election. However, there were previous elections that has been held in Nigeria, but those elections were just regional elections. So in 1964, there was a first federal election. But the outcome of this election was subjected to controversies, political crisis, of which made Nigeria to encounter political instability for a period of 2 years before military took over our government. So I'll just quickly give a brief review of the 1964 election before we now move into the topic, because one of the major causes of military rule in Nigeria was the incapacity of the civilian to govern, and that was as a result of the 1964 federal election crisis. However, there were some immediate causes of the military rule apart from the 1964 election. Now, Nigeria got independence in the year 1960, which happened on the 1st of October. But before this 1st of October, an electoral commission was introduced in Nigeria. It was the first electoral body in Nigeria. We call it the Electoral Commission of Nigeria. Electoral Commission of Nigeria. That's ECN. Electoral Commission of what? Nigeria. Or you can call it NEC. Now, this NEC does not mean National Electoral Commission, which we have in the Third Republic. It means Nigeria Electoral Commission, not National Electoral Commission. So it was set up in the year 1959. 1959. So in 1964, there was a federal or a general election that took place. And this election took place between two political parties that formed coalition governments. What do I mean by coalition governments? The merging together of major and minor parties to become a single political party. So it was an election that took place between the Nigeria National Alliance, and the United Progressive Grand Alliance. Now, from the word alliance, that is to tell us that a coalition was formed, coming together of different parties. So for Nigeria National Alliance, we have a major party known as the NPC, that is the Northern People's Congress. We have the NNDP, that is the first political party in Nigeria by Abat Macaulay. We have the UIP, that's United Independent Party by Chief Ladoke Akintola. We have the Dynamic Party, which is the DP by Chike Obi. We have the Midwestern Democratic Frontier and some other minor parties that came together with NPC, the ruling party, to become the National Alliance. Now, the chairman of this party was Sir Amadu Bello. That was the premier of the Northern region. Now, for the United Progressive Grand Alliance, the second party, that's the party that took second in the election, we had two major parties. That was the AG, which was the Action Group. We also have the NCNC. We have NEPU, that's the Northern Element Progressive Union by Aminu Kano. So these three parties became, and some other parties became the UPGA, that is United Progressive Grand Alliance. So 2 years after the election crisis of 1964, Nigeria experienced our first military rule. Now, when military want to take over, there is a particular conspiracy that is formed by military men. Now, this is a means of overthrowing a civilian government. We call it coup d'etat. So the first military coup d'etat in Nigeria took place in 1966. Now, this 1966 military coup was said to be a bloody coup because it led to the assassination of many nationalists in Nigeria. Now, however, if you want to look at military rule is not only limited to Nigerian political history. Other African countries have also experienced military rule. In fact, the only African country that has never experienced military rule in their history is Cote d'Ivoire, formerly called the Ivory Coast by the French colonies. So Cote d'Ivoire never experienced military rule. Now, the first African country to encounter military rule was Egypt in the year 1952. Egypt was the first country to experience military coup. Then the first West African country to experience military coup was Togo in 1963. So Togo was the first West African country when a man known as Livanus Olympius was overthrown from power. And in Egypt, a man known as Gamal Abdel Nasser overthrown King Farouk in the Egypt's position of their political system. So in Nigeria, on the 15th of January 1966, Nigeria experienced our first military coup. That was 6 years after independence. Now, one thing you should notice that it was this coup d'etat that happened this year led to the dissolvement of the 1963 First Republican Constitution. So the 1963 Constitution only lasted for 3 years, because after 3 years, the military, they abolished the 1963 Constitution and they took over government. Now, you should note that the man that spearheaded this military coup was a man called Chukwuma Kaduna Nziogu. He was the one that spearheaded the first military intervention in Nigeria. Now, after spearheading it, lot of people were killed. You know, I told you it was a very bloody coup. That was the most bloody coup in Nigeria history because there was a lot of bloodshed. People like Sir Ahmadu Bello was killed on this particular date. Our Prime Minister, Tafawa Balewa, who was appointed after the London Constitutional Conference of 1957, was also assassinated. In fact, the premier, one of the premiers of the Western region, that was S.L. Akintola, was also assassinated in his home at Odomosho. Minister of Finance then, Okotie Ebo, was one of those people that was assassinated. Now, only 2 individuals that were our nationalists then escaped this bloody coup. Now, the first person was Nnamdi Azikiwe. Now, Nnamdi Azikiwe was our ceremonial president during that period. He became our ceremonial president in 1963 due to nomination by the House of Representatives. So, Nnamdi Azikiwe, as at the event of the first military intervention, he was not in Nigeria. He was on vacation in West Indies. Probably that was why he escaped. Then another person that was not assassinated was Obafemi Awolowo. Obafemi Awolowo was also one of those that escaped the military coup. During that period, Obafemi Awolowo was already in prison. Yes, he was sentenced to jail in 1963. And the main reason why Obafemi Awolowo was sentenced to prison was because he was accused of what we call treason. And what is treason? In government, treason simply means national betrayal. He was trying to overthrow our prime minister from office. But this, we don't actually know whether it is true or false. It was just a rumor. So that was why, probably that was why he was not part of those people that was killed. And there's another theory that the first military intervention in Nigeria was spearheaded by the Easterners. They knew about it. Yeah, because most of the people that were killed were from the north. The Easterners, a lot of them, were not part of those killed during the first military coup. And in fact, the person that became the military head of state, who was the first military head of state after the, remember I told that Kaduna Nziogu was the one that spearheaded this. Now, the person that became the first military head of state after this 1966 military coup was Major General Aguiyi Ironsi. So when Aguiyi Ironsi came into power, in 1966. He abolished the 1963 constitution and he introduced a decree. Yes, in military system, they don't rule by act of parliament. They don't use constitution, no rule of law. They rule by what's called decree. So decree at the federal level, then at the state government level, we call it edicts. Edicts. So he introduced a type of decree. We call that decree unification decree. Unification decree was introduced by Major General Agoin Erosi. And what does this unification decree implies? It simply means there was a transition from federal system of government to unitary system of government. As at that period, federalism was operated in Nigeria. And federalism was introduced in Nigeria by the Literary Constitution of 1954. So the first person that abolished federalism in Nigeria was Agoin Erosi. Nigeria became from a federal state to a unitary state. And unitary state simply means when there is total concentration of power on the central government. And within the central government, there is nothing like decentralization or devolution. Power belongs exclusively to the military head of state. However, the tenure of Agoin Erosi lasted for just 6 months. After 6 months, on the 29th of July 1966, Nigeria encountered a second military coup. Now, this military coup was also bloody, but not as bloody as the first one that gave power to Agoin Erosi. And the person that took over from Agoin Erosi was a man, we call him Major General Yakub Gowon. Yes, a man from, I think, Plateau State, if I'm not mistaken, and he was also a Christian. So Yakub Gowon ruled for a period of 9 years. He ruled for 9 years. Now, he governed from 29th of July 1966 to the 29th of July, that same July, 1975. Now, let me quickly explain what happened when Yakub Gowon was in power. Now, at first, when Yakub Gowon came to power, most of the Easterners and even some part of the Westerners were against his administration. In fact, he was not the next person that was supposed to take over from Agoin Erosi. The next person that was supposed to take over from Agoin Erosi was said to be a senior military officer to Yakub Gowon. His name was Brigadier Ogudikpe. However, Yakub Gowon took over from him. Yes, he took over power from Agoin Erosi. So, during the era of Yakub Gowon, Nigeria now made a transition from, I told you he introduced what's called unification decree. So Nigeria now make a transition from a unitary system back to a federal system. Now, one thing about Yakub Gowon was that he was the first person to start what we call creation of state in Nigeria. Yes, creation of state in Nigeria. Before the creation of state started, Nigeria was divided into regions. Before we became republic, there were 3 regions. And these 3 regions were administered by premiers. In the northern region, we have Sir Ahmadu Bello as the premier. In the eastern region, we have Nnamdi Azikiwe as the premier. In the western region, at first it was Obafemi Awolowo, but due to the crisis, age crisis of 1962, and after independence, a man known as Chief Majekodunmi was administered as the premier of the western region. Then 1963, we have the creation of the midwestern region. Now, let me make you understand something, that during the regional administration, in the military system, all the premiers, where their power was abolished. So we now have military rulers in charge of the 4 regions in Nigeria. Yes, in the eastern region, the military governor was Lieutenant Colonel Odumegwu Ojukwu. That was in the eastern region. In the western region, it was Lieutenant Colonel Adekunle Fajuyi. In the northern region, it was Hassan Usman. While in the midwestern region, it was David Ejo. So regions were administered by military rulers. So one thing that Yakub Gowon did was that on the 27th of May 1967, close to a year after he took over power, he created 12 states in Nigeria. Now, out of these 12 states, 2 existing states already that have gained recognition, of which they normally have representatives during the pre-constitutional development, Lagos and Calabar, were created in Nigeria. So Lagos was one of those states created. Calabar also was one with few other states, making 12 states. And at the period when Lagos was created, we have military governor of these states. And the first military governor of Lagos State, why I'm using Lagos as a case study is because I believe that Lagos it has a very big history in Nigerian politics. And if you go back to the colonial era, you notice that Lagos was an annexed colony of the British colonial government. So the first military head of state in Lagos, military governor in Lagos, was Chief Johnson Thomas. He was the first military governor of Lagos. Now, he created state on the 27th of May, 1967. You see, this 1967, it was a very significant year in Nigerian political history. Why did I say it is significant? Because it was the same year that Nigeria experienced civil war, which was also called the Biafra War. So I'm out to quickly dive into a brief history of the civil war because it still falls under the military intervention, and it happened during Yakubu Gowon's regime. Now, what happened? 3 days after he created 12 states, that was 30th of May 1967, there was a man known as Major Colonel Odumegwu Ojukwu. He declared Biafra independence on this date. Now, what do you mean by Biafra independence? The Easterners believed that they were the minority. In the Eastern region, the capital of the Eastern region was Enugu. So Odumegwu Ojukwu, being the regional governor of the Eastern region, has made the Biafra people realize that the administration of Nigeria does not favor them. So rather, they should break out of Nigeria, which we call secession. So they want to gain their own political autonomy, of which Ojukwu should be their own president. The Easterners agreed to him. So one thing was, there was an agreement that had been signed when Nigeria was amalgamated in 1914. Now, the amalgamation took place in 1914. Who amalgamated Nigeria in 1914? That was Lord Lugard, Frederick Lord Lugard. And the amalgamation was the coming together of the Protectorate of the South and the Protectorate of the North, and the Lagos Crown Colony, of which it has been merged in 1906 with the Southern Protectorate. So an agreement of 100 years of staying together was signed. Before any region can break out of Nigeria, they must have stayed together for at least 100 years. So Nigeria did not agree. Yakubu Gowon did not agree. In fact, they went to Aburi in Ghana to add a summit, to call it the Aburi Accord, of which some conditions were given by these two parties. But due to the failure of Yakubu Gowon to fulfill his own part of the agreement, Ojukwu declared independence of Biafra on the 30th of May 1967. Now, few weeks later, on the 6th of July 1967, the Civil War broke out. So the Civil War lasted from July 6, 1967 and ended on the 15th of January 1970. So if you take note of the date, you realize that Civil War in Nigeria took place for a period of 2.5 years. That's 2 years and 6 months. Now, when Yakubu Gowon was in power, one of the initiatives he did was that he created what we call the highest regulating body in Nigeria. Now, you guys should note that the first ruling body in Nigeria was the Nigerian Council. The Nigerian Council was created the same year Nigeria was created in 1914. Now, this Nigerian Council was just like a legislative council by Lord Lugard that performed advisory function, which include official and unofficial members. So when Yakubu Gowon came to power, he introduced what's called the Supreme Military Council. The Supreme Military Council was the highest ruling body during the administration of Yakubu Gowon. So that was when Civil War started. And if you look at, there are some Cameroonians that look like, that resemble the Easterners, because probably when they were able to escape through the Cameroon border, they stayed there and they reproduced. So, you know, history is very, very funny at times. So when Yakubu Gowon was in power, in 1971, Nigeria joined what we call OPEC. OPEC, that is Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, because it was this 1971 that we experienced oil glut. And oil glut simply means the excess production or supply of crude oil. So that time Nigeria was experiencing excess supply of crude oil. In fact, that was when Nigeria now neglected the activities of agriculture and focused on oil. Oil was our major concentration. And oil as a natural resource was discovered in Nigeria in a commercial city of Bayelsa known as Oloibiri in Bayelsa State. Now, before that 1971, under Yakub Gowon, there was an organization that was created. We call it OAU. So OAU was formed in the year 1963. That is Organization of African Unity. That was 25th of May 1963. So it was one of those representatives in the Assembly of Head of State and Head of Government. So during the Civil War that happened, as at that period, Obafemi Awolowo was still serving a jail sentence. So there was an advice that Obafemi Awolowo gave Yakub Gowon. Now he said, one of the things Nigeria can do to end the crisis of the Civil War was to ban the importation of food products to the eastern region. Then another thing was that Nigeria should change the currency, because as at that period, Nigeria currency was the pound sterling, that is the currency of the British. So that was what led to the creation of Naira in Nigeria. So Nigeria changed from pounds to Naira. In fact, the Biafra, as at the period, already have their own national flag and their own currency. In fact, their official language, which was the East language. So that period was when Yakub Gowon appointed Obafemi Awolowo as the Minister of Finance, because Obafemi Awolowo actually studied economics. So he became Minister of Finance for Yakub Gowon. That is why till today, majority of people that experience this war, they are still angry at Obafemi Awolowo because he was one of those people that vouched his support for Yakub Gowon during the Nigerian Civil War. So Yakub Gowon ruled from the 29th of July 1966 to the 29th of July 1975. Another thing we should understand is that during the Civil War, Nigeria became a pro-Eastern country during the era of Yakub Gowon, in the sense that the country that came to assist Nigeria during the Civil War was the USSR. They assist Nigeria with weapons and ammunition. But the Western countries, like the British, they failed to, they failed to help us in fighting the war. So even the Biafras were assisted by Israel and France during the Nigerian Civil War. So 29th of July 1975, another military intervention broke out. And this one was when Yakub Gowon was out of Nigeria. He was in Kampala. He was attending OAU conference in Kampala. So before he came back, a man named Murtala Muhammad became the new military head of state, overthrowing Yakub Gowon from power. So let us look at Murtala Muhammad as the new military head of state in Nigeria. So that was 1975. He spent less than 200 days in office. Yes, he spent less than 200 days in office. Now, when Murtala took over, don't forget that we have military governors. Now, these military governors, during Yakub Gowon's era, they were part of the Supreme Military Council. So one of the things that Murtala did was that he excluded military governors from the Supreme Military Council. Now, the Supreme Military Council was still maintained as the highest ruling body in Nigeria. So when he took over, that was 29th of July 1975. Then on the 3rd of February 1976, Murtala Muhammad created a total number of 7 states in Nigeria. So 7 with the previous 12 created by Yakub Gowon. So Nigeria became a 19th state structured before the Second Republic. Nigeria became a 19-state structure before the Second Republic. Now, after creation of state, just 10 days later, which happened on the 13th of February 1976, Murtala Muhammed was assassinated. Yes, he was assassinated on a fateful Friday afternoon after coming from, Jumat prayer. So I don't think he was with escort. So as he was entering into his vehicle, he was shot multiple times inside his Mercedes. So that was what led to the assassination of Murtala Muhammed. And Murtala Muhammed also, he made sure that there was a strong decolonization policy in Africa. Yes, it was through administration of Murtala Muhammed that a country named Angola was able to attain independence in 1975. That was through the activities of their nationalist known as Agostinho Neto. And the period of Murtala Muhammed administration, Major General Olusegun Obasanjo was serving as his vice. So Obasanjo replaced Murtala Muhammed after his death. Now, who assassinated Murtala Muhammed? Based on history, it was said that the assassination of Murtala Muhammed was implemented by a man known as Bukasuka Dimka. Now, based on my own study, Bukasuka Dimka was a northerner. Murtala Muhammed was a Fulani man. Yakubu was a Fulani man. So maybe because he overthrew someone from his own region, from the north, that was why Bukasuka Dimka retaliated. Who knows? However, Bukasuka Dimka was the one responsible for the death of Murtala Muhammed. So when Obasanjo took over from Murtala Muhammed, which was in 1976, one of the conditions that Obasanjo gave was that he was going to hand back power to the civilian government. Now, there was a project that started by Murtala Muhammed, but that project, he was unable to finish it. Why? Because he died during that period. So in 1976, that same 1976, Olusegun Obasanjo now created the third tier of government in Nigeria. We call it local government. So there was a reform that was created in Nigeria. We call it the local government reforms. Of 1976. And also in 1978, Olusegun Obasanjo introduced a green revolution. We call it OFN, Operation Feed the Nation. This Operation Feed the Nation was to enable Nigeria production activities in the agri sector. Because why? Before that period, we are already focusing on oil. So he has to reintroduce agricultural activities into Nigeria to make sure that there is sufficient food supply in the nation. In that same 1978, because Olusegun Obasanjo has promised that he was going to hand power back, so they have to create another electoral body. So in 1978, Nigeria electoral body was formed, which called FEDECO, Federal Electoral Commission. This Federal Electoral Commission was administered by a man called Michael Ani. Now, FEDECO, as at 1978, already registered 5 political parties, because an election was to take place in 1979. Yes. So we have NPN, that's National Party of Nigeria. We have UPN, Unity Party of Nigeria. We have NPP, Nigeria People's Party. We have GNPP, Great Nigeria People's Party. We have PRP, People's Redemption Party. Then a year later, a new party was administered, 1979. We call it NAP, National Advanced Party. So this party was an offshoot of the NPC, formed by Maite Masule and other people like Shehu Shagari was also a member of this party. We have Obafemi Awolowo UPN, NPP. We have Ibrahim Waziri for this, but he left NPP to join JNPP. Why? Because it was not giving the ticket for a presidential candidate. Then we have the PRP, People's Redemption Party by Aminu Kano. We have the NAP by Tunji Braithwaite. But this NAP, they did not win any seat in any of the states in Nigeria. That was the 19 states in Nigeria. However, the outcome of the 1979 election was won by NPN. So NPN became the ruling party in the Second Republic. Second Republic started in 1979. And Shehu Shagari became the first executive president of Nigeria in 1979 on the 1st of October 1979. Shehu Shagari became the president of Nigeria, the executive president of Nigeria. Now, during this period, Nigeria practiced what we call presidential system of government. You know, before we practiced presidential system of government, it was military system. And before military system, it was a parliamentary system. And parliamentary system in Nigeria started from 1960 to 1966. What led to the end in 1966? The first military intervention in Nigeria. So, few years later, that's after 4 years, there was to be another election. Yes. So in 1983, another election took place. But the 1983 election too was subjected to crisis. So as a result of that, there was another military coup that happened, which toppled the administration of Shehu Shagari. Now, this military intervention, we have to date because it happened overnight. It was during crossover night, watch night, that this one happened. So is that we say it happened on the 31st of December 1983, or we say it happened on the 1st of January 1984. Because during the 1st of January, New Year, the person that addressed us as our new leader was Major General Muhammad Buhari. So Buhari became the new military head of state. Now, during the era of Buhari, you know, one of the things Buhari introduced was import substitution. In fact, during that period, there were a lot of imported items that Buhari banned. One of those things were wood. Yes, he banned the importation of food, and this affected a lot of private business. In fact, it affected the business of MK Abiola, Chief MK Abiola, because that period MK Abiola had a newspaper known as the Concord newspaper. I know that to produce newspaper, you still need a raw material, wood, to produce. So he actually affected his business. Supreme Military Council was still the highest ruling body, but Buhari did not create any state. However, Buhari in 1984 he introduced the kick against indiscipline. Sorry, the war against indiscipline. Yes, he introduced war against indiscipline, and it was during this Buhari era that Nigeria had you know, the Ghanaians were sent out of the country. Yes, I don't want to go into that because that's another part. It's another foreign policy. That's when we have what's called Ghana must go. So Buhari administration was toppled. Yes, for it just spent like 2 years. So on the 27th of August, yes, on the 27th of August, 1985, another military intervention happened on the 27th of August, 1985. The type of coup that happened on this date was called a palace coup. Yes, Nigeria experienced palace coup on the 27th of August, 1985. Now, what do I mean by a palace coup? A palace coup simply means a coup whereby a senior officer is overthrown by his junior colleague, his junior staff. Ibrahim Babangida was a junior staff to Muhammad Buhari. In fact, he was a student. It was Buhari that actually trained him. So when Ibrahim Babangida became the new military head of state, now one thing we should know was that the administration of Buhari was not really effective. In fact, Buhari was less popular than his vice. The person that was very, very active in Buhari's era was Tunde Idiadon. Tunde Idiadon was the vice. When Tunde Idiadon left Nigeria for Mecca, that was when the next military rulers were able to capitalize and take over from Buhari. So the next person that became the new military head of state after Buhari was Ibrahim Babangida, or you say Ibrahim Badamasi Babangida. Now, one of the things he did was he first of all abolished the Supreme Military Council. Yes, he abolished Supreme Military Council. He now created his own council known as the Armed Force Ruling Council. The highest ruling body of IBB was the Armed Force ruling council. Yeah, armed force ruling council. So let us take note of that. You know, the first one was the Supreme Military Council for the military system. Then the second was the armed force ruling council. So in 1986, he introduced a new economic policy. We call it the Structural Adjustment Program. So this Structural Adjustment Program is an agreement between Nigeria government, the IMF, the World Bank, the international bodies to obtain loan so that they can ensure the development of Nigeria, so just to finance Nigeria. But the outcome of this Structural Adjustment Program, we didn't really see it. In fact, there was a negative consequence for this SAP. And one of the negative consequences was, before the introduction of this SAP, the exchange rate of Nigeria was very, very high. In fact, the value of Naira was greater than dollar. As that before the period, $1 was equivalent to about 0.8 or 7 plus dollar, 7 plus Naira. Yeah. But immediately after the SAP, $1 became 4 Naira. And that's how the valuation of Nigeria started to happen. It started falling. And not only SAP, some other things that happened during the military era. Then in 1987 also, Ibrahim Babangida, he created 2 states. He created Akwa Ibom and Katsina. So Akwa Ibom and Katsina was created 1987. So that's now 12-7, then another 2 states. So Nigeria will now have a total of 21 states. Then, few years later, in 1991, Ibrahim Babangida created 9 more states. So 9 more states became 30 states. So Nigeria became a total number of 30 nations in 1991. And this was created by Ibrahim Babangida. So in total, Ibrahim Babangida created 11 states. Yeah, he created 11 states. Now, IBB was to retire. He was to retire in 1993. In fact, during IBB era, there was a man that was killed through a letter bomb. He was assassinated. His name was Delegiwa. He was the owner of Newswatch newspaper. But before the event, the military members of IBB had already warned them not to publish a negative article against the administration of Ibrahim Babangida. But you know, there's always all this propaganda, and most of this propaganda were said to be true. So Ibrahim Babangida was accused of assassinating or sending people to assassinate Delegiwa through a letter bomb. Yes, it also happened in 1986. So when IBB was to retire in 1993, there are some scholars that believed the Nigeria Third Republic started in 1993. Why? Because that was the year Nigeria had our next general election, and that was the year Nigeria was to go back to civilian government. However, all this 1993 reform had been set up in 1989 during the Third Republic. So the Third Republic actually started in 1989. Let's go back to Obasanjo's era. Before Obasanjo was to hand power to the civilian government, there was a constitutional drafting committee that was introduced. Now, they were to lay down the 1979 Federal Constitution. The 1979 Federal Constitution. And this committee was headed by Chief Rotimi Williams. So after the agreement of this committee, they were to report to a Chief Justice known as Justice Udo Udoma. So let us take note that Akwa Ibom and Katsina were first created, the 2 states created in 1987, yes, September 1987. Then 1991, that's on the 27th of August, he also created 9 more states. So 9 plus 2 making 11 states. So 11 states was created. Now there's a particular question in government that we always have 2 conflicting answers. They will say, who introduced import substitution in Nigeria? Now, in some cases you will see Muhammad Buhari, in some cases you will see Ibrahim Babangida. The import substitution actually started by Muhammad Buhari. But it was IBB that later make it became effective, like during IBB's era, because IBB, if you go back to IBB foreign policy, it was majorly economic goals, to achieve economic goals. IBB foreign policy was majorly to achieve economic goals. That was why IBB formed or reconciled the relationship between Nigeria and the Western countries. It was during IBB era, because before that era, Nigeria had cut ties with the Western countries, that's the British, the United States, and France. And this happened during Yakubu Gowon regime, because under Yakubu Gowon, Nigeria became a pro-Eastern nation, but under Ibrahim Babangida, Nigeria later became a pro-Western nation. So IBB was to retire in 1993. I remember I said some people believe 1993 was the beginning of the Third Republican Constitution. No, it was actually 1989. Yeah, 1989. Now, in 1989, that was the beginning of the new constitution in Nigeria. We call it the Third Republican Constitution. However, IBB was still in power, but he was to retire. So he was making plan for his retirement. And IBB then, he operated what's called a diarchical system of government. His own military rule was based on diarchy. What is diarchy? Diarchy simply means the combination of military and presidential system together. So he was a dictator, but he was operating based on presidential system of government concepts. So in fact, we don't even call him military of state. We call him the president, President Ibrahim Babangida. So in 1989, a new electoral body was introduced known as National Electoral Commission. That was NEC, National Electoral Commission. Now, the chairman of this NEC was Humphrey Nwosu. He was the chairman of NEC. So as at 1989 Republic, they said Nigeria should operate just two-party system. So there were two political parties in 1989 that contested for the 1993 general election. What were the two parties? We have SDP by Tony Aneyin, the chairman, and we have NRC by Tom Ikimi. The presidential candidate of SDP, Social Democratic Party, was Chief MKO, that's Moshood Kashimawo Abiola, while the presidential candidate of NRC, National Republican Convention, was Bashir Tofa. So the election took place between these two political parties, which was conducted by NEC. Now, IBB was still in power. He was overseeing all these affairs. He didn't say anything. The election took place on the 12th of June, 1993, of which we consider the most free and fair election in Nigeria history, because if you look back, all the other elections were subjected to crisis and controversies. So 1993 election, it was free and fair, totally free and fair. The election results declared MKO as the winner of the election. And MKO was a philanthropist, one of the most popular businessmen in Nigeria. In fact, he was the richest man in Nigeria during this 20th century. MKO was declared the winner by NEC, but the mistake MKO made, which made him to be accused of treason, was that he now went to declare himself as the president on the sitting of Ibrahim Babangida that has not yet left power. Yes, he went to declare himself as the president. So what happened was, Ibrahim Babangida now annulled the election. The election was annulled. MKO was probed. He was sentenced to jail. Yes, because he committed treason. He was accused of committing treason. So that was why the 1993 election became void. Yes, it became void. And you know, every June 12th, we always celebrate Democracy Day. Yes, in memory of Chief MKO Abiola. So IBB that has retired now appointed an interim head of state in Nigeria. We call him Chief Ernest Shonekon. Chief Ernest Shonekon became an interim head of state. Yes, an interim head of state. But you know what? Chief Ernest Shonekon's administration was toppled by Major General Sani Abacha on the 17th of November 1993. So Abacha became the new military head of state in Nigeria. He was the one that overthrew Chief Ernest Shonekon, the interim head of state that served for just 6 months, appointed by Ibrahim Babangida. Now, when Abacha took over, the Armed Forces Council of Ibrahim Babangida was abolished. So he now replaced it with a new regulatory body known as the Provisional Ruling Council. So the Provisional Ruling Council became the highest ruling body under, so you know, when we say highest ruling body, the Nigeria highest ruling body currently is the National Assembly. That's where we have the House of Senate and House of Representatives. So the military era, we also have ruling bodies. In the pre-colonial era, in the, what's it called, colonial era, we have the Nigerian Council, the Legislative Council, the Central Legislature, the House of Representatives. Then after independence, we have the House of Senate, House of Rep. We now have the Supreme Military Council. Then under Abacha regime, we have the Provisional Ruling Council. Yes, Provisional Ruling Council. Now, on the 1st of October 1996, Sani Abacha created a total number of 6 states. Yes, 6 states in Nigeria. He created 6 states in Nigeria. Now, remember we have 36 plus the 6 created Abacha. Nigeria became a total number of 36 states. You see, in government, they may not ask you what are the 12 states created by Yakubu, but you must know that Lagos and Calabar was part of it. But for these 6 states, you have to know it, yes. So for the 6 states created by Sani Abacha, let me give you an acronym for you to remember. We call it GEN-BES. Just so that when it comes to the creation of the 6 states by Sani Abacha, we can use this acronym GEN-BES. GEN-BES, what is G? G stands for Gombe. E stands for Ebonyi. N stands for Nasarawa. B stands for Bayelsa. E, and the second E stands for Ekiti. Y, Z stands for Zamfara. So these 6 states were created by Sani Abacha. Then in 1995 as well, Nigeria was suspended from the Commonwealth of Nations. Yes, under Abacha's era. When was Nigeria suspended from Commonwealth? It was during Abacha era. Why did they suspend Nigeria? Because a man was assassinated in 1995 by Sani Abacha's regime. His name was, he was a political activist, a human rights activist, Ken Saro-Wiwa. So the assassination of Ken Saro-Wiwa in 1995 led to the suspension of Nigeria from Commonwealth. But something happened on the 8th of June, that's 8th of June 1998. What happened? Sani Abacha was assassinated. He was killed. Now there is a rumor that Sani Abacha ate apple. Sani Abacha was poisoned. Nobody really knows what happened to Sani Abacha. The only thing we know that he died on this date. It was not a natural death. He was assassinated. But how he was killed, we did not really know. So it was just, you know, just like they said, Chief MK Abiola was given tea and he died in prison. No, Chief MK Abiola was not poisoned. And in fact, MK Abiola was one of the Are Ona Kakanfo of Yoruba land during that period. Just like where we have Gani Fawehinmi, the current Are Ona Kakanfo. So MK Abiola was actually beaten to death. Yes, he was beaten to death in prison. But how Sani Abacha died, we didn't really know because nobody was present. But we know that he died. So he died on 8th of June 1998. So after the death of Sani Abacha, then a man now took over from him. We call him Major General Abdulsalam Abubakar. Now, this man was the last military head of state. Remember, the first person was Aguiyi-Ironsi, the last person was Chief Major General Abdulsalam Abubakar. So Abdulsalam Abubakar only governed for 2 years. Yes, 2 years. On the 29th of May 1999, Nigeria moved back to presidential system of government, democracy, and civilian administration. And that was what led to the introduction of Olusegun Obasanjo as the new president of Nigeria in 1999 after the 1999 election conducted by the new electoral body under the supervision of Justice Ephraim Akpata, known as Independent National Electoral Commission. So on this note, I believe I've been able to do a little justice on this topic titled military intervention, using Nigeria as a case study. My name is Adebowale Daniel, and I would like you guys to subscribe to our YouTube channel, eTUTOR YouTube channel. And again, if you have any questions or addition, kindly let us know in our comment section. Thank you.